This is a reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verses 1 through 14. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. "Well, I'm going to go out and fish," Simon Peter told them. And they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say that, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, only about 100 yards. And when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153, but even with so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, "Come, have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. The word of the Lord.
Good morning. Good to be with you this morning. How are you all doing on this Memorial Day weekend? You're here, so that says something. With the sunshine. I mean, you get extra points for that, I think. So it's good to be with you again. I've been here a number of times. Happy to be here at a time when you're giving a break to Susie so that she can have a little bit of a sabbatical break. And I wanted to pick this passage this morning because I want to talk about church and the challenge of change and transformation. And so we have this passage from John, a resurrection passage, right? Jesus has been crucified and resurrected, and now he's appearing to the disciples. And it's always interesting. They never quite know what's going on. And the happy resolve of this story is that when they share a meal with Jesus, as is usually the case, they understand better who he is. So you've probably heard this passage before, that after Jesus is crucified, the disciples, not knowing what to do, go back to what they've always known, which is they just want to give commercial fishing another try. And it makes sense. They spent the last 3 years dedicated to following Jesus, preaching and teaching throughout Israel. And now, well, it's kind of uncertain, kind of crickets. Nothing. No plan. They're not sure what to do. They don't know what the future holds. And it's in times like this that we often go back, when we're confused, to the things that we know. And for the disciples, like I said, this was getting out on a boat and doing some fishing together. The good news in all of this is that Jesus meets them in their futile efforts to go back to fishing and to return to their old ways, and redirects their paths by, one, reminding them of his power and provision, and two, reminding them of his presence with them, even when it appears uncertain. Now, I could go on a little bit more about the ways that this is important for us as disciples personally and individually, but I want to shift the emphasis a little bit to talk about our experience as disciples together collectively in the church. Meaning how we might be feeling like those disciples, a little lost and disoriented, like we've lost our playbook, like we don't know what we should be doing or what direction we should be going. Wonder if this reminds me of anything. Gosh, it kind of sounds like the experience of the mainline church in the 21st century. Because for years, for decades even, we've followed Jesus around the country, building churches, establishing programs, serving our communities and neighbors, talking with local leaders and politicians, hosting elaborate parties and get-togethers, and then we look up 30, 40, 50 years and notice it's all changed. Where are the people? Where are the politicians? Where's the community? In other words, I think we're a lot like those disciples after Jesus' crucifixion, kind of wondering, wait, what happened? What are we supposed to do? Now, side note, at least for us, unlike the disciples' experience, there have only been about a gazillion books chronicling the decline of the mainline church. And so there's lots of explanations about why this happened, but as I'm sure you all know very well, there aren't many books that tell us what we should be doing next or how we can be addressing these dynamics faithfully now. I mean, sure, there are a bunch of get rich quick or get members quick books, but I'm not talking about those. So having said that, I can tell you a surefire mistake we all make in the mainline church. We try to relive the past. You probably know this as the common reaction when we look at a membership loss. We say, well, if we're losing members, the obvious thing we should do is get more members, right? Sounds logical, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with having stability and critical mass to do mission and ministry. And the loss of those things has real ramifications. But I'm talking about the emotional effort that we put into trying to recapture who we were. Because who we were often veers into who we thought we were years ago, in another time, in another era, when things were different. And what we lose in that effort is the ability to discern who God's calling us to be now, in this time and place. When we think about who we were, that often leads to what we can't do, focusing on what we can't do, because we're not who we once were, and how it's much harder and different now. And what we lose in that is we lose our ability to think about what we can do now with God's help. We tend to focus on what we don't have, enough money, enough staff, enough volunteers, because we want to do, of course, the things that we did in the past. Maybe not what we're called to do in the present. And then that leads to some worry about who's not here. Our children, our friends, our mentors, the community. Because if we had this, we could be who we used to be. Every mainline church I know spends quite a bit of time and energy focused on the way things were. But sadly, very little time and constructive thinking about who we are now and where God is calling us to go now. Not in the past, but in the present, in this time and place. It's never going to be like it was. But the question is, as a church, can we trust God in the present? With all the challenges we face today, declining membership and budgets and very different and diverse communities we're called to serve. What is God calling us to do now? How can we be faithful now? Can we adapt and live into the new opportunities for life and ministry that surround us? Can we let go of the past and all of its glory and embrace the new life that God is calling us to collectively as a church? I know that if there's a church, a mainline church, that's been trying their darndest, just edited myself there a little bit, to live into this new future, it's you, Summit Avenue. It hasn't been easy, but kudos to you for facing the mainline temptation to rest on your laurels and relive the past, and instead venture out into uncharted territory as a church. I know that the past 10 years-ish, that for these past 10 years, you and Susie have taken the less traveled road of church experimentation and innovation, all in an effort to discover together what God has for you and your community now, not 50 years ago. And I'm sure I'm not saying anything that you don't already know. It's pretty darn hard. Doing something new as a church is hard. Admitting you don't know the path forward is challenging and humbling. And trusting God for your future requires vulnerability and trust in God and in one another. And sometimes you just have to stay at it and persevere and wait and hope for Jesus to show up. Now, in my own life, recently, my wife and I have experienced this just a little bit with our garage. We have this detached garage that we've wanted to remodel for the longest time. We've had drawings and plans and talks, even fights, about the garage for, I don't know, about 20 years. And at one point, it was so difficult that I just kind of lost all hope, and I just stopped caring about the garage and literally left it to fall in on itself. It didn't, unfortunately, but that actually would have been a great resolution, I think. But then our kids got older. Sharon got a new job. We had a little bit of money saved up, and a friend recommended a contractor just out of the blue, and they had this opening in their schedule. And all of a sudden, in the span of about 2 months, we're now nearly done with this remodeling project that we never thought, literally never thought would happen. But you stick with it. You keep at it. And you hope. And then maybe there's an opportunity for a little bit of progress. So the long and short of this little story is that on Friday, this past Friday, we had the appliances delivered, and that night we put a pizza in the oven and toasted a glass of our favorite beverage, me, a local craft beer, and my wife, water, and my son, an energy drink. And now what used to be an eyesore and a family problem, in fact, I would say the family fight, the old tired conversation about what to do with the garage, has now become transformed and what we are calling our guest house. A place where we will host and welcome friends and family and share in God's abundance, providence, and grace. Now, can an old mainline church be renewed and experience change and transformation and rebirth? Can a declining mainline church work through the challenges of the past and set a new course for a different future? I think so. Will it take patience and commitment and hope and God's timing? Absolutely. But Jesus calls us to new life and to hope and new possibilities every day. And if we can experience it on a personal level, why shouldn't we experience it on a corporate level? Now, this story goes on that we just read from the last chapter of John, and it goes on to speak of this redemption story for Peter. Because let's not forget that after breakfast, Jesus calls Peter aside and offers him an opportunity to atone for his denial in the garden by asking him 3 times to affirm if Peter loves Jesus and will feed and tend his lambs. And like Peter, we're called to feed and tend to the needs of the communities that we serve. Maybe not in the ways that we used to or in the ways we've done it in the past, but in new ways, always asking ourselves and Jesus how to live out his love for the world in tangible ways. Is this what redemption and transformation and change looks like for the mainline church? Reaffirming our love for Christ by being willing to learn anew how to love and tend to the needs of our community? I think so. What I do know is that if we venture out and serve Christ in true humility and love, can we really get it that wrong? I mean, I suppose it's possible. But if we get it wrong, that would just be another opportunity to learn and grow and do better next time. So what's the challenge there? Because we can be assured of this, that Jesus will call us to new places together. Because listen to this little phrase he said to Peter right after that moment of redemption. He said in verse 18, "Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you to where you do not wish to go." Now, John tells us that this was all about the way in which Peter would die. So that gets a little morbid. But what I want to say is I think this is a good analogy for the mainline church, that we can't experience renewal and growth if we continue to follow our own path into these familiar destinations that we've been to. We have to be willing to accept that the path forward is not the path that got us here. And our journey with Jesus means that we must allow Jesus to direct our path anew, to lead us into new areas of ministry and service, to give us new experiences to grow and to explore. I understand that all this was said about Peter, but I also think this is about us as a church, how things have changed, and now perhaps we feel instead of the church being a leader in society, now we're being led around by others to places we don't want to go. And maybe we're not thrilled about this dynamic. But that's the whole point of this passage, I think, that God is with us in all of our circumstances. And Jesus is here to guide us to our next chapter as a church. The key is to do as Jesus tells Peter, "Follow me." Well, this wouldn't be a true gospel story if it didn't have just a little coda at the end of Peter's failure to understand. Here's this passage in verse 20. And I have to say, I think it's one of the more snarky passages in the Bible. I know we're not supposed to say this about the Bible, but just listen. This is not actually in the lectionary reading. The lectionary reading stops, and it doesn't go to this place. It says, Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. The disciple whom Jesus loved is John, also the person who's writing the gospel. So anyway, he's rubbing it in just a little, John is. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at the supper, and he had said, Lord, who is it that is going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, Lord, what about him? Jesus said to him, if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me. So the rumor spread in the community that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but, again, he's repeating it again. If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Again, if Peter is a stand-in for the mainline church, I just want to say that when it comes to the renewal and transformation of the church, we cannot be looking our shoulders at all the other churches and saying to God, well, what about them? There will always be churches that look like they've got the winning mix. The winning mix that all the people want. They've got the numbers. They've got the flashy signs. They've got the pastors in skinny jeans, and they've got all the money. That's fine. Good for them. That's not us. Every church has different gifts and a different story. And the mainline church was the big kid on the block back in the day, and now others own that mantle. It's fine. Let it be. God needs a variety of churches who minister to a variety of people. It just doesn't work to compare ourselves to one another as if there were only one standard or one type of church or one path to renewal. I hope everything's okay. So what I want to say to you all this morning is to stay at it, Summit Avenue. Keep your spirits up. Trust that even though the path forward isn't clear, that God is still leading you. You're giving Susie a much-needed break, and that's awesome. Kudos to you for letting her step away and have some personal time and rest and renewal. I've been blessed to have 2 sabbaticals in my 16 years at Seattle Presbyterian, and those at times away were why I'm still able to stand up here and continue to serve. And I hope that this sabbatical time has been good for you. Hopefully you've had some time to reflect and to renew yourselves. All I know is that the path you are on toward renewal and transformation is a challenging one. But you're not on this path alone. Your partners in the presbytery are with you on this trail and praying for you as you walk along together. So today, let's remind ourselves of the way in which those early disciples recognized Jesus on their journey as a church when they had table fellowship with Jesus and shared a meal. So when we join for communion this morning, may our eyes see him, and may we experience God's grace and hope and assurance, the kind of assurance and hope that we need to sustain ourselves along this path toward renewal. Amen.